I where we are doing things in person, but we're also still doing things on Zoom. And some of the learnings that came out of this pandemic is that sometimes the Zoom class can offer opportunities that an in-person class might not offer. When Adrienne and I were discussing the format of this class, we were excited for the potential to show clips from the TV show Shtisel, which will come through your computer screen, which would have been more difficult to do if we were in person. So welcome everybody. What do you think, Adrienne? Should we get started? Should we jump in?
I think it's a good time to jump in, and anybody else who trickles in, I will of course let in.
So what I'd love to do, as I tend to, is I'd love for people to either they can raise their hand and we can unmute you, or you can put a sentence in the chat about who you are for the group. You can introduce yourself to the group and maybe say a few words about why you wanted to come to the Torah of Shtisel.
Oh, Niesenbaums, if you want to unmute, I see you raising your hands. And happy birthday, Keith.
Thank you.
We love Shtisel!
Sorry. Were we a little too enthusiastic?
A little too enthusiastic because you didn't tell us your names. You know, we all know.
Anne Niesenbaum, Keith Niesenbaum. We love Shtisel!
All right. Okay, so raise your hand if you're here because you've been geeking out on Shtisel for the past year and a half. Okay, a fair number of you. That's fine. There's no shame in that.
I see the Slimowitzes have their hands raised.
Okay, great. Let's go around.
Okay, so me too. We've been following Shtisel all this time, and we absolutely don't understand it.
But we love it.
I mean, it's a whole different Judaism, you know, and a whole different culture. And I'm always fascinated by this is my heritage, you know.
But we've learned a lot that we didn't know.
Yeah.
Awesome. Wow. Well, we're going to get back to that because that's why we're calling it the Torah of Shtisel. So wonderful. Okay, great. Who's next?
I see the Nemetskis have their hands raised. Hi, Nemetskis.
Okay, we loved the Shtisel, and we loved it for many, many reasons, but I felt that it was Shakespearean, and that actually, even though it was about Orthodox Jewish people in Jerusalem, it could have been about a Greek father and family, an Italian father. I just felt it was universal, and that's why we loved it.
Great. I saw Stu Goldberg had his hand up, and Jeff Krugman is very eager also.
Okay, Stu, you, and then Jeff, and then the Carmens I see also. But Stu, you have to unmute. There you go.
There I go. Well, Jill and I were totally infatuated by Shtisel. We watched, I hope we watched all of it. The drama, because although they are Hasidim, their lives could be very much like ours, and they are, because they're people. And added to, what we appreciated so much was from the Hasidic point of view in Jerusalem, and the whole thing. It was just incredible. I don't know if we like Shtisel more than Unorthodox, but we loved Unorthodox also.
Thanks, Stu. Jeff, you were next.
I'm sorry. I thought this was a cooking show and it was about Schnitzel. So I'm going to have to leave. But
We
I'll stick
understand. We
around.
understand. We understand. That's going to be next summer, the Torah of
Gotcha.
Schnitzel. And it'll be an interactive cooking class. We'll do it in the culinary arts studio.
Thank you. Sorry.
Carmen's.
So I'll just speak for myself, and Ann can chime in if she wants to. We've watched Shtisel at least parts. Well, we watched the whole thing twice and parts for a third time. Each time we watched it, we've gotten more and more out of it. On one level, it's like going to the zoo and looking at individuals in the zoo that are unlike anything that we know of. It's ironic that Kive in the first episode is seen at the zoo drawing lemurs who look all alike. They're all together and they look, you can't separate them.
Oh, that was good.
And then you have his population. They get together and you can't separate those. I found that interesting. Secondly, I found that, especially with the current situation, the Hasidic world in Jerusalem, specifically in Israel in general, the anti-Zionist view, the referrals to those bastards in power, yet when the planes flew over, everybody looked. And again, part of growing up on the periphery of that world, not in that world, but on the periphery of that world, I also enjoyed the fact that it's a tradition that we still study. After all, we study Talmud, we study sages who probably would be living in that world today. And if it wasn't for them, we probably wouldn't be dealing with many of the things that we talk about today. So I like it on multiple levels.
I found some of it somewhat painful. The plot, the plight of some of the people, they just didn't know how to rouse themselves to a better life, which certainly is available to them. Also, I thought it was interesting in the later episodes about some of the women and the strength of many of them and how they are far more independent and modern than I think many of us would have thought.
Okay, great. Are there any other people who want to just share a few words about why they're here before we jump right in? We've got a lot to do today. And I'm very excited to go on this journey with you. But if there are a few other people who want to just chime in, they can. Otherwise, you can put anything you'd like in the chat. It's available, and then we can all see it as we're going.
I think we're good, Rabbi.
Okay, great. So welcome to the Torah of Shtisel. The first thing, we want to talk about is why is this 4-week session together called the Torah of Shtisel? What does that mean? Truthfully, I guess it's a little bit of a joke, a little bit of a pun, because Shtisel obviously is not Torah, right? Shtisel is a TV show about fictional characters who live in a real place in Israel. But I was reading one article about the origins of Shtisel, and it came about that the co-creators of the show were having lunch one day, and the restaurant was called Shtisel, and they said, we should make a TV show and it should be called Shtisel. And that was how the TV show started. So, on one hand, we have to distance ourselves from thinking that Shtisel is some great Torah, right? On the other hand, who was it that said that they felt like it read like Shakespeare? Okay, great.
It was Marion. Yeah.
Okay, Marion. I love that comparison, because a lot of times when I read Shakespeare, I feel like I'm reading Torah. And what I mean by that is that I get so much out of it. I learned so much about the world through these writings. And I think that my goal over the next 4 weeks is to see how much we can get out of Shtisel, as if it were a great text, as if it were a sacred text that we can learn from. And just like Torah, right, we can see ourselves in the text and also see the world through that text. So, that's one reason why I call this the Torah of Shtisel. But the second reason is because Shtisel is, of course, about a religious family, the Shtisel family. And this family has Torah, capital T and lowercase t, deep in their kishkas, right? It's not just a text that they study abstractly, but it's inside them, right? It's the rhythm of their lives, but it's also the language of their lives. And I don't mean the Hebrew language. And so I think that when I was watching the show, one of the things that struck me was that in every episode, every exposure to this program, I felt like I was getting capital T Torah, actual lessons from Judaism, from our sacred texts that came casually, and we're going to explore those together. But also like what I would call lowercase t Torah, which are lessons about our lives as Jewish people. And so my goal with us over the next 4 weeks is that for each week that we're together, we'll spend a few minutes enjoying a few tidbits of Torah that we could extrapolate from the conversations of the characters in the show. And then each week we'll also tackle a big theme, a big idea that is present in the series through supplemental Jewish texts. So are there any questions so far about what I said? Everybody ready to jump in, learn some Torah with Shtisel, of Shtisel, from Shtisel? I also found that prepositions are interchangeable when you're studying Shtisel. You just swap them out. Great. I made a little PowerPoint presentation that I'd like to share with you right now. Everybody can see that, right? Yes, thumbs up. All right, awesome. So the Torah of Shtisel. Okay, so we're gonna start every class by learning Torah from Shtisel. So you may remember that throughout the series, in passing, often we will hear characters either make reference to a piece of sacred text, or we'll be learning a piece of sacred text, or they'll rattle off a line from the Torah or even from some of our rabbinic texts, as if it were their own language. And what it made me think of is the way today sometimes we will use a quotation from a book or a movie to articulate how we're feeling or what we're feeling, in the hopes that somebody else will understand what we mean because they've also read that book or seen that movie, right? We call them pop culture references. And in Shtisel, the pop culture references are from our ancient sacred texts. But also we know that the Shtisel family is made up of rabbis, and rabbis are teachers. And so sometimes they will have exchanges with people and they'll almost be quizzing them about Jewish life, right? So for example, the first text I wanted to study comes from the first episode of Shtisel, where actually Andy Carmen already mentioned that Shtisel goes to the zoo. and Akiva Shtisel goes with his father, Shulam, and a class of children. And they want to see the hippos, and they start mitchering Shulam Shtisel. They say, Rav Shtisel, we want to see the hippos. And they start walking towards the hippos, and right away, in a classic Shulam Shtisel manner, he starts saying, so where do we get, how do we learn about hippos in the Torah? Where do we learn about them? Because they're not mentioned in the 7 days of creation. So this text from the book of Job is actually the text that he talks about while they're in the zoo. So I thought we could learn it together so we could absorb the Torah of Shtisel. So in the book of Job, without diverging too much from our core curriculum of Shtisel, the story of Job, as you may recall, is that Job is tested by God in a pretty rigorous manner, and a lot of things are taken from Job to see if Job will continue to be a man of faith. And at the end of the book, there's an exchange between Job and God, where God is basically challenging Job and saying, I want to reassert my authority over the world in front of you, and gives a big speech about all the things that God can do that nobody else can do. And one of them is the creation of this animal called behemoth, or in English, sometimes we call it behemoth. And when you read this description, you could see how the rabbis think that this text is referring to a hippopotamus. So let's read it. It says, take now behemoth, whom I made as I did you, right? God is talking to Job. He eats grass like cattle. His strength is in his loins, his might in the muscles of his belly. He makes his tail stand up like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are knit together. His bones are like tubes of bronze, his limbs like iron rods. He is the first of God's work. Only his maker can draw the sword against him. The mountains yield him produce, where all the beasts of the field play. He lies down beneath the lotuses in the cover of the swamp reeds. The lotuses embower him with shade. The willows of the brook surround him. He can restrain the river from its rushing. He is confident the stream will gush at his command. Now, I feel very blessed right now to have two real live veterinarians on the call today. So I have to ask Doctors Niesenbaum and Carmen, does this sound like a hippopotamus to you? If not, please educate us. Science.
Except for the tail. Yes. I don't think their tail stands up like a cedar. Just
Dr. Carmen, rebuttal?
I'm not sure. I'm not a specialist on rear ends of hippopotami, because they're usually submerged. But I've seen them in South Africa, and I've known them to be both quiet the way they are here, and also quite fast and quite willing to tackle whatever comes up against them. So you have to be very careful. So God, who made this animal with multiple personalities, not just a peaceful animal, but one that is able to take whatever it is that's coming down the road.
Great. What I appreciate about this text is that it also describes that kind of, I don't even know what to call it, density or thickness that I also associate with a hippo. Even the descriptions, his bones are like tubes. His bones are like tubes of bronze, his limbs like iron rods. I could imagine in the ancient world this animal being incredibly terrifying, like a dinosaur, right? so many rabbis attribute this description to the hippopotamus, that the hippopotamus was there at the time of creation, and this is a proof text for it. Okay, another tidbit of Torah from Shtisel also comes from one of the first episodes. Akiva Shtisel, as you may recall, is teaching the Talmud to tiny little children, which I am always very jealous of. Like, I wish that somebody taught me Talmud when I was a small child, so that I didn't have to cut my teeth on it as an adult person. But the Talmud has many topics, many subjects, and in the class that we witness, the subject of the class is about an ox goring a cow, which might not be relevant to any of the children in the class, but there you go. So I brought today, for your viewing pleasure, the text that they were studying in that class. So the text that they were studying is from the Talmud, a piece of the Talmud called Bava Kama, which has to do with ownership and damages, property, and what is our responsibility to our own property and to our neighbor's property. These books of the Talmud, go into detail about theoretical scenarios in which our property might be damaged by somebody else, or stolen or lost, and how we can react. So here it is. If an ox or a bull gored a cow and its newly born calf is found dead nearby, and it is not known whether the birth of the calf preceded or followed the goring, half damages are paid for the injuries inflicted upon the cow, but only quarter damages are paid for the loss of the calf. If a cow gored an ox and a live calf was found nearby, so that it was unknown whether the birth of the calf preceded or followed the goring, half damages can be recovered out of the value of cow and quarter damages out of the value of her calf. Now, this is not generally a text that I would share with you. I would not think that this was the most interesting text to bring to your attention, because it's very legal, right? It has to do with the legal details of damages and responsibility. But I wanted to bring it especially today because, like, I love this part of what I love about the Torah of Shtisel, which is that in the text of Shtisel is woven all kinds of deep, detailed Jewish texts that are referenced rather casually, right? The entire time that we spend with this subject is probably 30 seconds in the TV show. But in the context of the lives of the character, these are texts that are very much present for them and engaged regularly. Any questions about this text or, the Torah of Shtisel thus far?
I'm just wondering, and I forget the classroom scene where this took place, although I'll sort of remember it, how this is transferred over to humans as far as law and sacred obligation as far as one damaging someone else where there's a child involved and vice versa. I forgot the scene, so I'm not sure what the context is.
So you mean, are there comparable laws that have to do with human damage? So so the answer is yes, there are. They were not discussed in the episodes of Shtisel that we were watching, so I didn't share them with you. There are very, very clear laws in this book of the Talmud, as well as in another book that's actually just called Damages. And it discusses what the monetary value might be for damages to a human person. And in the context of this text, it also those other texts that have to do with damages paid for damages to human lives also distinguish if the life was a baby, if a mother was pregnant, and that woman was injured, if the baby was lost. Though all of those questions are addressed in these legal texts as well. But in the context of this class, we don't actually hear a conversation about this text. We only hear that they're studying it, that it's part of their daily study. Because I imagine that in that class, which was a Talmud class, that every day they just study another page of Talmud. And when we got to visit that class through the TV show, this was the page that they were on. Any other questions? Oh, I see Lynn and Anne and who
I
else?
think Irving Nemetsky I see as
Okay,
well.
great.
So Lynn,
Oh, thank you.
hi.
Now, I was just wondering, is there any relationship to this information with what's going on in Shtisel? In other words, are we supposed to get something deeper out of this that somehow reflects on the events and what's going on in the story?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that the idea that I'm sharing at least is that the world of Shtisel is a world where these sacred texts are floating around everywhere. They're a part of the daily exchange. They're either formally being studied in a classroom or they're casually being dropped like in the zoo. And that is part of what makes the show have a richness in terms of its Jewish texts.
So just to bring us into the environment.
Yes, and for us to, for every week when we're together now, we're going to lift up a few of these texts so that we can learn a little bit of Torah bonus because we watched Shtisel.
Anne.
Anne and then
Irving.
I'm going to be a little long-winded. I'm going to go back to Andy saying that in the zoo, there were the animals that we couldn't make sense of who's who, and that we tend to look at the Orthodox people in that same way because it's a sea of black and white clothing and hats, and we don't know them as individuals. And one of the things that I loved so much about Shtisel was that it enabled us to know them as individuals, as people, as opposed to just those Orthodox folks. Now, to continue, when we study Talmud, we can discuss a passage like this for the whole hour of class, and we will be giving our opinions and how it relates to us, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But when they're studying it in their Talmud class, is that kind of discussion encouraged, or is it just, this is what the rabbis told us, so this is it, and end of discussion, you just need to learn this and memorize it? Or is it the basis for a discussion the way it is when we do it?
Great question. So, when we, we have the privilege of spending a few seasons with the Shtisel team, right? When we see in season 1, Akiva and Shulam spend a lot of time in the Cheder, in a day school for small children, right? And there, I think the learning is very frontal. It's about absorbing as much text as possible, absorbing as much law as possible. But for example, when we start seeing some of the teenage boys in Shtisel engaging in their study, it's almost always done with a partner. That's the model, the Chavruta model. And the idea there is to really dissect every text together, not just to absorb it and memorize it, but to ask questions, to argue about it, to try to understand what questions are being asked, to wrestle with every text out loud. So it's not, I think there is always a discussion happening in what we would call debate midrash, that kind of the environment of adult learning for these texts.
Thanks, Anne. Irving.
Well, basically, what you present is what they actually read and learn and devour. But when do they question how they arrived at the values? Isn't that important to determine why those values were chosen and for what reason?
Yeah, so I think your question sounds like related to Anne's question, right? Which is where
Right.
the room for discussion and debate. And I think that there is a lot of room for that. There wasn't in this particular scene with small children, but the culture around studying Talmud in particular is one where there's a lot of discussion and debate in general.
But does a discussion ever change the written word in terms of what they see?
Well, no, it doesn't change the written words because the Talmud is a closed document, right? It's finished. We don't add to it. But the laws continue to be explored and written about even today. How to interpret laws. In fact, there's one scene that I didn't bring this time, but I have it maybe for a future Torah tidbit about the question about music on Shabbat. I don't know if you remember, this is like an obscure scene, but Elisheva, who's Akiva Shtisel's love interest in season 1, is a twice widowed woman. And on Shabbat, she has a Walkman that she listens to in her bed. And her deceased husbands come to her and talk to her and say, how can you do this? This is against the Jewish law to listen to music on Shabbat. And they have a whole debate about whether the law has changed. And one of them says, well, you'll remember that the rabbi wrote a dispensation. If you turn on the Walkman before it's Shabbat and you just let it play, then when you put the headphones on, it's okay. And the other rabbi argues and says, I don't agree. This is always forbidden. So even in these traditional communities, there are questions about how can we interpret the law? How can we continue to understand the law in modernity? Does that answer your question a little
Yes.
bit? Okay, great. Okay, I want to move on now to part 2, which is the theme of the day. So every week we'll have a few Torah tidbits, actual Torah that we got to hear about in Shtisel, but then we'll also delve into a theme that we see in the series and explore that through supplemental Jewish texts. So this week's theme is dreams. The season premiere, the series premiere starts with a dream that Akiva has, and dreams are present throughout the series. And dreams have a very are widely discussed and questioned in Judaism. And so I wanted to start our little series together by exploring the theme of dreams in Shtisel and also in Judaism. So what I'd like to do right now is I'd like to share actually 2 clips, 2 dreams. So I'm going to do that now. Can everybody see my screen? Thumbs up? Okay, here we go. this is the first scene of the series.
מה נשמע, אנשים? ברוך השם. מה בשבילך עקיבא, גדול או קטן? גדול שכוח. שים לי גם חמוצים. אין חמוצים. מה זאת אומרת? אין וגם לא היה אף פעם. טוב. אמא? מה את עושה פה?
התגעגעתי.
לאנשים?
אנשים? מה יש לי מאנשים? התגעגעתי לקצת קוגל. קר לי, יקירי. כל כך קר לי. ואין שום דבר מה לעשות. אפילו חמוצים אין כאן.
איפה אתה יודע איך נראים אסקימוסים? היית שם פעם. אבל מה הפשט? מה זה בא לומר כל החלומות האלה? לא בא לומר שום דבר.
Okay, so in this first scene, which we're going to talk about in a minute, Akiva has a dream about this restaurant that he frequents, and his mother, who had passed away nearly a year prior. And you saw the exchange in the dream, and then right away we see that he's troubled by the dream, and he asks his father, "Mahapshat, what does it signify? What's the meaning of this dream?" And his father kind of writes it off in this moment. But we see actually many dreams throughout the series of Shtisel. And I wanted to actually show another one. And then we're going to get into a little discussion. So, can everybody see that? I'm going to make it big now. And here we go. Okay, this is several episodes later. We're going to see a dream that Shulam has.
תעזוב, תשאיר אותו כאן. הלכתי לישון.
אבא, זו הייתה בדיחה.
זיברת? זיברת. כן, שטיסל, מה אתה אומר? מה זה? גם טוען רבני וגם מזכיר של הבסטי? כן. אין פה סתירה? ניגוד אינטרסים משהו? שטיסל, אתה קצת מבולבל. פה זה לא הבייס דין של העדה, פה זה הבייס דין של מעלה. פה אין טוענים רבניים, פה זה רק אתה מול הבייס דין של מעלה. כנס, הם מחכים לך כבר. אבל אמרת לי בפירוש שאין לה קייס, שאין לה על מה לקבוע אותי. כל זה נכון שם למטה, אבל פה למעלה זה אחרת. פה יודעים את כל האמת, והאמת היא שאתה חתיכת דריק.
Oops, sorry, we're not done.
סיבה, פה זה באמת הבסט דין של מלו? מה זה אומר? שאני כבר מת?
בהחלט, זה מה שזה אומר.
אבל איפה ההיגיון כאן, זיברת? איך אני יכול לקבל התקף לב אם אני כבר מת?
אין קשר. מי שסבל לב למטה, סובל גם פה למעלה. רק שפה אי אפשר למות מזה עוד. יש כאן יהודים שעוברים 10-20 התקפי לב ביום. בהצלחה.
Okay, so slightly different dream here, right? We see that Shulam Shtisel is having a tremendous amount of anxiety in his dream. In this episode, his one of his daughters, from whom he is estranged, is suing him, and he goes to sleep and has this dream that he's not in the legal court that he was planning to go to meet his daughter, but he's in heaven's court, where he is being tried for his life, right? Like the heaven's court that we imagine on the high holy days. Except it's just as administrative and bureaucratic as the regular court that you might go to in Israel. So let's talk for a moment about the Torah of Shtisel, dreams. What are some of the things that you think come through in the dream sequences that we see in the show? How might we feel about those dreams? What do they seem to lift up or make seem important in the series?
Anne, I see your hand.
So they're both anxiety dreams. And they're both in some way related to death. The first, Akiva's relation to his mother's death. And I think sort of a feeling of helplessness that his mother is hurting in some way and he's not able to help her. And with father, it's more that his anxiety is, I'm not being pious enough. I'm concerned about my earthly behavior, but I'm not paying enough attention to my spiritual behavior. But both very strong anxiety dreams.
Right. And not necessarily something that you would ignore, right? The dreams feel, in both scenes, they're very jarring, right? In the first scene, we know Akiva right away wants to talk about it with his father, wants to figure out what's up. And in the second scene, it's a nightmare that Shulam wakes up from, terrified, right? It jerks up. Okay, great. What else? What else do we notice about these dreams? What would you say is, the Torah of Shtisel in terms of these dreams?
I would think that in general, especially in the later seasons, these dreams are dark. They are indeed dark in nature. They don't have any lightness to them. There is extreme tension in both of the dreams, and which mimics a lot of what's going on in life. I've found at least the later sections of the show also very dark, both in photography and in script. So I think this mimics, I think the dreams are dark in nature.
Okay, great. So I heard, that the dreams are dark, but also that they're very much connected to life, right? So they're, and there are some elements in in each dream that are, that feel real, that feel like a part of their real lives. There's also, I'd say, a part of the dreams that are absurd, right? The Eskimos in the middle of Jerusalem having, dinner at their kosher restaurant. I like the one Eskimo who's got there's all the fish on the table that, and I don't know if you saw that behind the fish are all of these pickles, which is what Akiva asked for. And he said, we never had pickles. So it's like he came with his own pickles or something. And then, of course, in heaven's court, right, there's this guy who Shulam knows from regular court, from the real legal world in Jerusalem, who is now operating on this, this high heaven's court. Okay, so are there dreams in the series of Shtisel to teach us about Judaism? No, probably not. The dreams are a really great storytelling tool, right? To get us to understand the psyche of our characters and what's on their mind and what's troubling them. But Judaism does have a tremendous amount to say about dreams, especially the Talmud. And we're going to look at a number of texts right now that approach dreams from different perspectives. So many of these texts that we're going to look at today are from one book in the Talmud, the book of Brachot. It's an entire section in the book of Brachot about dreams. What they mean, what they are, what they're not, how to control them. And then because the book is called Brachot, this section concludes with a bracha, a blessing that you can say to change the fate of your dreams. So one piece of this Talmud says, there are 5 matters in our world which are 1/60th of their most extreme manifestations. They are fire, honey, Shabbat, sleep, and a dream. The Gemara, the Talmud, elaborates and says, our fire is 1/60th of the fire of Gehenna. Honey is 1/60th of manna. Shabbat is 1/60th of the world to come. Sleep is 1/60th of death. And a dream is 1/60th of prophecy. Now, this text is, it's often used in many different contexts. I think it's a very rich, interesting text about how the things that we have in our daily lives might be a tiny taste of something that's more, ethereal or celestial. The fact that honey might be 1/60th of the miracle food that kept us alive in the wilderness, I think is a very beautiful image. But these last two, I think, are particularly relevant for us when we're talking about the culture of Shtisel, that sleep is 1/60th of death, and that dreams are 1/60th of prophecy. What does this mean? What do we mean when we're saying that? One way to understand it is that that it actually has to do with a percentage, that there's a little tiny bit of prophecy in every dream that you have. But another way to think about it would be a little bit less concrete, which is that there's an aspect of our lives that's like this other thing. So the same way that when we go to sleep, there's an aspect of sleeping that's like death. We don't communicate with people. We're not conscious. We're lying down. It's usually dark. And similarly, when we think about dreams, that there's something wondrous about where our mind takes us, about the conversations that we might have in our dreams, that they might offer us insight into the world in a way that we might not be able to access regularly. This is a text, a modern text from an essay called "Dreams in the Talmud and in Depth Psychology." Susan Borham says, in dreams, according to the Jewish mystical tradition of Kabbalah, although the meeting of souls sometimes takes place among the living, more often the medium of the dream enables one to meet with the dead. Obviously not possible body to body. This can be possible soul to soul. The departed come back to speak, often to warn the living of pending catastrophe. Talmudic lore relates stories where rabbis, uncertain of a law, went to sleep. In their dreams, a former sage appeared to them, informing them where to search for the information, something they would not otherwise have known. So, in other words, there's a culture in the, certainly by this time, by the Talmudic time, the rabbinic period, of understanding your dreams as almost an access point to people who have departed this earth. That there's something about speaking to someone soul to soul through your dreams. And I can't say for sure that the writers and creators of the Shtisel team had this text in mind when they were writing, but I wanted to share it with you because it really spoke to me. As Anne mentioned, both of these dreams have to do with being alive in your dream and interacting with people who are dead, or understanding life after death through your dream. And this is a very accessible Jewish concept, the way in which we could understand our dreams as a portal to communicating with loved ones. For those of us who are in this room tonight who have lost somebody that they care about, I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but when you encounter that person in a dream, it can be very powerful. It can be sweet and tender, and also difficult, because in those moments you feel connected to them soul to soul, rather than the way we do in our awake lives, where we just feel connected to them through memory. Are there any questions? I know we're short on time, but I want to open it up if people are feeling things and want to reflect. Otherwise, we'll just keep going. There are lots of ridiculous texts that I brought with you to understand dreams through Jewish law. Okay, well, don't hesitate to put something in the chat or to raise your hand. And if I don't see your hand, I'm sure that Adrienne will.
I'm not seeing any right now, but I'm keeping an eye out.
Thank you, Adrienne, my hero. So this is another text, also from Masechet Brachot, from the Talmud, and it says, Rav Chisda said, a dream not interpreted is like a letter not read. As long as it is not interpreted, it cannot be fulfilled. The interpretation of a dream creates its meaning. So, in other words, if you have a bad dream, this text basically says, just ignore it. Don't talk about it. The minute you try to interpret it, then you could worry that it's going to come true. But if you just let it be, nothing will happen. Dreams really come to fruition through their interpretation. Now, I didn't study psychology or Freud with any depth. I know that we have some therapists and social workers who are here with us tonight, but I find this to be a really interesting text in terms of our own psychology, right? If we give credit to the dream by interpreting it and saying, what does it mean? All of a sudden it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? That we're putting it out there into the world, outside of the context of our dream, into reality, that this is now something that we should address. Rav Chisda said a good dream is not entirely fulfilled, and a bad dream is not entirely fulfilled. And Rav Chisda said a bad dream is preferable to a good dream, as a bad dream causes one to feel remorse and to repent, right? Like the ones that we saw just now. And Rav Chisda said, a bad dream, his sadness is enough for him, and a good dream, his joy is enough for him. So this is interesting. This is all the same person, right? The same person is offering all of these different perspectives on how to deal with your dreams. I'd say the main theme for Rav Chisda is that our dreams are things that we should encounter and acknowledge, but not put too much stock into, right? If we don't, they're not, no matter how good or bad they are, they won't ever be 100% fulfilled. They won't be real prophecy. And sometimes it's the dream itself that is that is just about the emotional response, rather than it having an impact in the world. Okay, so this is another text now. It says, what do straw and grain have to do with a dream? It sounds like a joke that my 7-year-old's going to tell us. Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, just as it is impossible for the grain to grow without straw, so too is it impossible to dream without idle matters. Even a dream that will be fulfilled in the future contains some elements of nonsense. And this also reminded me of the Shtisel dreams, right? Because even if some of these dreams are giving insight into the world around us, there's an absurdity to dreams. There's always an element that makes us realize that it's a dream, right? That fish, I didn't go to bed with that fish in my bed. What's he doing here? Whatever it is. So this says that that's actually an integral part of a dream. A dream has moments, these elements of prophecy or of possibility, but also of absurdity. Okay. Rav Huna Bar Ami said that Rabbi Padat said that Rabbi Yochanan said, one who sees a dream from which his soul is distraught should go and have it interpreted before 3 people. The Gemara is surprised by this. Interpreted? Didn't Rav Chisda just say a dream not interpreted is like a letter not read? In other words, if one is concerned about a dream, why would he actively promise its fulfillment? Rather say as follows, he should better it before 3. He should bring it to 3 people and say to them, I saw a good dream. And then they should say to him, it is good. Let it be good. May God make it good. May they decree upon you from heaven 7 times that it will be good, and it will be good. Now, this is something I'd love to try in my own life. Something really bad happens, and I say, something great happened. And then all around me, everybody says, yes, everything is great, and everything will be great. It's just great. Everything's great. But the idea here, I think, is really powerful, which is that we actually can control our dreams, right? We can't control when they are happening, but we can really respond to them with positive energy as a way of controlling the impact that they have on us. But it does seem like it flies in the face of the other dreams, of the other comments that say, basically, if you have a bad dream, kind of, just bury it deep, don't talk about it, and that way nothing bad will happen. So this is the only text that I brought, the only rabbinic text that's not from the Talmud, from a source, Orchot Tzadikim, and it says this. Dreams come about through an angel who accompanies the individual. And just as all thoughts are not true, so all dreams are not true. And one who accustoms oneself that all their thoughts are true, then even in the night, they will see visions of truth and they will know future things just as the angels do. So I thought that this was a very beautiful text about dreams, that dreams are, they're not necessarily prophecy, but they are kind of gifts of the divine. They're ways that angels or divine beings can accompany us, but also recognizing that there are elements of truth in our dreams. There are visions of truth in our dreams, but not everything in our dream is true. And that our responsibility is to understand that the dreams can lend themselves to us in terms of helping us to see things. I don't know if this has ever happened to you before, but sometimes you have a dream as a way to process a lot of information, and you wake up and things become a little bit clearer because your subconscious did all the work. But that we could kind of hold gratitude for our dreams as indicators that there is, there's the divine presence with us when we're sleeping. So those are the texts that I brought to you today for the Torah of Shtisel, dreams. I know it's 8:03, but if anybody has any questions or comments they want to share, that's welcome. And then we'll wrap up and we'll continue this adventure next week.
And Niesenbaum, I saw your hand.
And I see
When Akiva said his dream to his father at the table, and his father said, and he said, "What does it mean? What does it mean?" And his father said, "It's nothing." And I thought that was kind of heartless. But now, in light of what you just showed us, maybe he's saying it's nothing because if you don't interpret it, then it's nothing. Like maybe there was that other layer.
Right. Shulam is Akiva's father is I find him to be a very difficult character because he seems rather heartless in many moments and has a lot of regret. He acts and then he regrets. And in that particular episode, I remember that he completely doesn't want to talk about Akiva's dream about his departed wife. But then he brings it up himself to another person and asks them to interpret it. It starts to get under his skin. He starts to wonder, maybe there is something to this dream. Maybe I shouldn't have dismissed it so quickly. But I do think that there's something, there's a skittishness about dreams in this community based on these texts, that whatever is happening in the dreams is something that we're not quite sure about. There's not a clear, definitive answer about how to respond to dreams, especially dreams of somebody who we loved. And so Shulam is quick to dismiss it. Ellie.
I think you have to include, if you're going to talk about good dreams, bad dreams, the dreams that we call nightmares, because that has a powerful effect on so many people, and they're not so easy to dismiss.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in these, in the dreams that we see in this TV series, the dreams that might be a nightmare are kind of wake-up calls for these characters, right? But in real life, we know sometimes they're not wake-up calls at all. They're not choreographed scenes in a show, but they're a part of our fears and anxiety that come up and overwhelm us, right?
Yes.
Thank you for sharing that, Ellie. Stu, I saw your hand.
Stu, you need to unmute though.
Hi.
Hi.
So much of Freud revolves around dreams. And Freud was not he was a Jew, of course, but not certainly not an observant Jew. How much of the Talmud do you think Freud understood? Because the Talmud, hundreds of years before Freud, is answering Freudian questions.
So I'm so glad that you brought that up. That one of the articles that I referenced in that PowerPoint presentation actually asked that exact question. Did Freud read the Talmud? Because there are, you could easily put them in dialogue. The article says that they're pretty confident that Freud never read the Talmud. But it's an interesting question that I'm holding, which is so much of Jewish thought is passed down, not in a formal course of study. I wonder if maybe, Freud's parents or grandparents said, oh, you had a bad dream, like don't interpret it, because they knew about this text or something. Maybe it kind of, through osmosis, he was studying the Talmud and he didn't know it.
But it's incredible, hundreds and hundreds of years before Freud, interpretations of dreams.
Yes, yes. And it's
dreams is such a big part of Freudian psychology.
You're absolutely right. And a lot of this feels very psychological when you read this section of Talmud. It really does feel like
it's just incredible.
Yes.
We are incredible people.
Go us. Thank you for sharing that observation. Thank you everyone for being here for our inaugural episode of the Torah of Shtisel. Next week, we'll be learning a few more tidbits of Torah from the series, and we'll be unpacking another hefty theme. I want to thank everybody so much for doing this with me. Thanks for being here.
Great to see everybody. See you next week, if not sooner.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.